Welcome back to Burnout Break Room, the podcast that's like a break room, but helpful, where we look at burnout through a realistic lens, talk about ways to take a break from the grind, and spill the tea. I'm Caitlin Truhella, creativity coach and speaker.
And I am Lyndie Larimore, a licensed therapist and certified career coach.
We are your hosts, and thank you for joining us here in the Burnout Break Room. How you doing today, Lindy?
You know what? I'm good. I am experiencing a little bit of what I've discovered is a vulnerability hangover, and I don't love it, but here we are. So that might be the tea that I spill today.
Mm, yeah, I definitely know that feeling too. It's for me, it's very much that visual of physically taking off armor and noticing just exactly, how many bruises and, might have been lingering under the surface. But it's a very specific kind of hangover for
Mhm.
sure.
I didn't know that it was a thing until I saw Brene Brown's second TED Talk. Do you know what I'm referring
Mm.
to?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I know the one you're talking about.
In her second TED Talk, she talks about her first TED Talk and how she had to spend, I think she said like 2 or 3 days on the couch because of her first TED Talk, and she called it a vulnerability hangover. And it blew my mind. I was like, what I didn't even know what that was. And I think I experienced one today and have been for years, actually, in hindsight. And yeah, it's real. It's a thing. And I think vulnerability very much goes hand in hand with burnout in very specific ways,
Mm.
because there's the kind of vulnerability that we choose to feel and it's healing. And then there's the kind of vulnerability that is forced upon us and can be on the best day stressful, on the worst day damaging.
Mm. Mm-hmm. I totally hear that.
And I think the journal prompt from last week was actually a really nice, it actually helped me to understand what was going on. So thank you for thinking of that one. The journal prompt that said, let's sit for 10 minutes and do nothing and see what comes up and write about it. And
Yeah. So I'm really glad that that was a positive experience. I really enjoyed this one too, especially because I think sometimes we can approach those kinds of do nothing activities with making it too complicated or overthinking it. Even I feel like one of the most common ways people look at those kinds of activities is something like meditation or related to it. And a lot of times when I talk to people about those kinds of activities, the biggest frustration or decision behind not wanting to do those practices is because I couldn't figure it out or I couldn't do it right. And thereby thinking that there's a right way to do those things. And I think also back to, I believe it was in Winnie the Pooh, actually, the one of the first books where Christopher Robin is saying, I'm gonna go do nothing. And Winnie the Pooh says, well, how do you do that? It's the most adorable excerpt of that story, especially, from such an innocent, and childlike perspective. It's very easy to get too into our heads about these things and wanna do it right or make sure that we're squeezing every last bit of potential and, efficiency out of this time. I've got to make it work because I've got one shot. I've got 10 minutes or 15 minutes. It's got to work. And so we're kind of white knuckling this, meditation situation. Fix me.
Yes, that is such a real thing. And it's funny because I remember when I first started, I set a timer. I went into this week, like after our last podcast, and I'm like, I'm going to go find a beautiful place in nature and I'm going to sit and it's going to change my life, right? Didn't do any of that. I sat on my couch with my coffee, which was actually quite nice. Yeah, it didn't change me. I was actually struck by how unremarkable it was at first. But also the big realization that I had was I've spent so much time in life trying not to daydream. As someone with ADHD, that was my constant state, and it was getting me in trouble a lot and disrupting my life. And so I spend so much time like I can't daydream. Like I have to focus. I have to focus. So it actually felt really indulgent to be like, I can think whatever I want for 10 minutes.
Mm.
And it's okay. I can allow it. But then it was like, okay, now I have to do the thing. Like now I have to be an adult and I have to do adult things. And so it really made me start to think about how much imagination plays a part in our childhood and how at one point in our lives that's supposed to be a really great quality, but then when we're adults, like we're supposed to somehow not have that anymore. So those are all my deep thoughts from our journal prompt.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for sharing. I know it can feel a little bit weird doing those kinds of things, especially when we are truly alone with our thoughts and even just the recognition of like what it means to be here and be a person.
Mm.
And yes, I very much had the same experience, and I constantly have to remind myself of exactly what you were talking about in terms of daydreaming, because I mean, yeah, I was told the same thing, in school. You've got to focus, you've got your head in the clouds too much, and I remember seeing that kind of messaging in a lot of either specifically media directed at children, movies, shows, whatever, or even like family related media, those kinds of phrases, you got your head in the clouds and you're never like going to do anything with your life if you don't sit down and focus and stuff like that. And, these ideas of, or this pressure of imposing a far off future on a child full of, imagination and that sense of possibility, I think is really such a disservice that so much of us have experienced. And it's truly tangible. We see it all the time. Over the years in recognizing this, I've really tried to make time. And I know this is going to sound like such a weird thing too, making time to daydream. In a way, it's kind of like my meditation. And I know that there has been more conversations, and I believe even a TED talk around the importance of being bored, especially with the emergence of the information accessibility everywhere, so many different ways to consume information constantly. It is a never-ending stream. And to also include some of my music listening taste, one of my favorite songs by Bo Burnham is called "Welcome to the Internet," and the line is, "Could I interest you in everything all of the time? Where apathy is a tragedy and boredom is a crime." I absolutely love that song. First of all, because it's silly and funny, and it's a great reminder. But being bored is when we get some of our best ideas. I mean, that's the essence of shower thoughts, it's where the mind goes when we don't have so many, pressing deadlines and other pressures to put on ourselves, and that's where the creation happens. And so that's one of the reasons why I really like this activity. And for myself, the experience is very similar to yours in that it does feel kind of unremarkable, because in the same way I love the idea of, going to a park or a hiking trail, or even just like a shaded area by some trees, and, really taking in, nature around you and being at one with your space, when realistically it's most likely at my kitchen table, staring out the window while I'm waiting for my ramen to cool down or something like that. It's still in those moments where we can reclaim ourselves. And I absolutely love this practice. And also going back to what you're talking about before, the fact that this feels so indulgent,
Mhm.
I really appreciate the ability to reframe what we consider to be a luxury, because I feel like a lot of the conversations are already heading in this direction from where we started, several years ago with the term self-care. And of course, that term has very much been commoditized and,
Oh,
tied
yeah.
to more consumption, but still heading in that direction of recognizing what we see to be a luxury. Why is this thing considered a luxury? Is it because we have such little time to spare for it, or because so many other things have taken our time hostage, or we lost touch with ways that we see them as being valuable?
Mhm, mhm. Dropping some wisdom, Caitlin, like you always do. The other thing I was thinking about in relation, so I love how you said, reclaiming yourself, that sentiment of like you're taking a moment for yourself is where we reclaim ourselves. And, when we think through the lens of burnout, oftentimes, and not always, definitely not always, but oftentimes we get burnt out on doing the things that others demand of us
Mm,
by serving
mm,
others' visions, do we talked about productivity by being productive in a way that serves others, whether it's the work we're doing serves others or the money that we're making and our skill is paying the bills for someone else, right?
mm,
um, and so taking 10 minutes for ourselves again is like it's kind of radical, but if we don't do that, I do think that's a huge contributor to burnout, is when every moment is blocked off. I mean, full stop, right? When every moment's blocked off, like we're gonna get burned out eventually, I think. Like, but to do nothing, even if we block off that time to do nothing, which is kind of what you and I did, like it's how we reclaim ourselves. But the other thing I realized too, coming back to this vulnerability piece, the things that our minds wander to when we take time for ourselves can feel really scary sometimes.
mm,
The busyness keeps us from the scary things. And it's because I took this moment that I realized that I'd had this really interesting experience, if you don't mind me sharing, with
please
vulnerability
do.
yesterday, um, where so I'm a singer, I'm a classical singer, and I was in a voice lesson, and my voice teacher's amazing and really does a great job of creating a safe space, really thinks in terms of like helping people feel safe and as singers and as women or the whatever gender expression they have, but just really helping that person feel safe. And I remember in this lesson, there was a moment where I was like, I had this very distinct feeling of like, I need to grab something right now. And I wasn't dizzy. I wasn't like tired. It was just like, I need to grab something. And afterwards, as I was leaving the lesson, I was like, oh my God, I felt completely exposed,
Mm,
completely exposed in a way that, like, were I naked, I would have felt less exposed than in that moment. And it's because I realized afterwards that I'm old. I've been singing for about 40 years now. Um, this was the first time that I realized that when I am singing, I am most vulnerable.
mm,
And I can't explain it to you. It's not talking about feelings. It's not therapy. It's not intimate conversations with people. It can happen then, but like something about singing is very vulnerable to me. And this might be unique to me. I've talked to other singers who feel the same way, and I don't know that it's unique to singing. I'm sure there's something about the act of creativity in front of others that, and I'd love to get your thoughts on that, Caitlin. And so I then had a rehearsal in a choir situation, a choral situation where, it was a bunch of singers singing a cappella with a piece that we're all really invested in, really excited about. And I felt it again. But I notice when I'm singing with others, I'm fine. The second people can hear me, like Lyndie, it's like, oh my God, like, my throat constricts. Like it's a very specific feeling. And it's like I suddenly can't sing. Like, not that I can't sing, but like all of the technique that I've learned for these years kind of goes out the window. And I feel like I can't make the same noise that I make, when I'm not feeling vulnerable. So it was a real striking realization that I had because I sat for a moment, right? Because I allowed my mind to be freed to think whatever came up. And if I hadn't, it was a hard thing to realize, and I could have easily avoided it. But I realized that it is in the vulnerability in order for me to be the most expressive version of myself, the most creative version of myself, and the healthiest version of myself, I have to experience that vulnerability.
Mm. First of all, thank you so much for sharing that because it is such an important part of the process, but definitely also incredibly raw. And as you were talking about, that sensation of, if you were naked in front of a whole crowd of people, you would have felt less exposed.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what is so fascinating about our creative expression because it is so firmly rooted in our essential parts as a person. I think that is why it feels so vulnerable. And it kind of reminds me of, or like the same kind of interaction as when you're talking to somebody about a dream you had
Mm-hmm.
because there's two pieces to that. First of all, you are never going to be able to communicate to another person with the degree of clarity that we would want for them to truly understand what this dream looked like, what it felt like, what you're actually experiencing. And so there is this anxiety that comes from wanting to share an extremely deep and intrinsic part of us. I mean, for after all, dreams come from our subconscious, and
Mm-hmm.
so they are integral to who we are. But it's so difficult to describe these scenarios and sensations with any degree of clarity for them to truly know what it is we are experiencing. And the other side of this is, of course, understanding that dreams are incredibly personal. And because they originate from the subconscious, they reveal so much about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it's scary because even if we knew, let's just say for this individual conversation about said dream, you were very well informed about the symbolism, about where these themes are coming from, about what it demonstrates about you as a person, even if you know all of the parts of where that's coming from and you can connect the dots about the parts from your subconscious that you can connect it to and reason why, the person you're telling isn't going to make those same connections. They're going to be making their own assumptions. That's just human nature. And so ultimately, what it comes down to is being misunderstood
Mm-hmm.
and not being seen for such a critical, integral part of ourselves because the shared experience that we all have, every single human being on this planet, we all want to be seen and we all want to be heard. And so to present such an integral part of ourselves that is a piece of creativity in its infancy, to share it when it's new, when it's raw, with the rest of the world, and even just being aware of the potential of not being seen or heard the way we would want to, that's positively terrifying. It's, I mean, honestly, even just talking about it feels like a nervous system response to anticipating there being some kind of threat. It triggers our nervous system. And that experience of vulnerability is like no other.
Mm-hmm. And Caitlin, as you're saying this, I'm beautifully said, by the way, powerfully said, and yes, like exactly what you're describing. When I feel vulnerable, my nervous system kicks in, which affects my breathing. It affects my throat. Things tighten, my tongue tightens, my neck tightens, my shoulder tightens, which all drastically affect how I sing, right? So absolutely, like that vulnerability and safety feeling is a really important part of, like, we can't be creative if our fight or flight system is triggered. And I'm thinking about safety and vulnerability when it comes to burnout. It's a burnout book by the Nagoski twins. I talk about this often, written by one twin who's a sex therapist, another one who's a choral conductor. So when I saw this, I was like, yes, I'm here for this, right? They talk about the first chapter is basically, this is the burnout cycle, this is the stress cycle, this is what causes it, this is what helps to heal it. That's the first chapter. And then it seems like almost the rest of the book is, these are all the things that cause burnout, and it's the patriarchy, it's racism, it's body shaming, it's I'm forgetting some, but like all of these things. So I'm thinking about, as a singer, and this isn't breaking news or anything, but there's been a lot of sexism and racism in the classical community, like horrific examples that still happen. And so, Caitlin, it was so powerful and right on when you talked about being seen. Like, I got shivers when you said that, because when I'm singing, I didn't even realize this about myself, but I want to be seen and heard. That's the goal. And I'm thinking same for any creative process, same for like making a great spreadsheet, right? Like, like we want to be appreciated and seen and heard for our talents, right?
Yes.
And then when you are in situations that feel in any way unsafe because you're sharing this talent, but you're under the direction of someone who can only see you as a sex object, or only see you as the color of your skin and therefore make assumptions about your abilities, or only see you as a certain size, or only see you as a gender that doesn't reflect the gender that you are. You don't feel safe, and you don't feel seen, and then you can't feel heard, I think is how I see that going. So I feel like it's so powerful. We share our talents to be seen and heard, and then when we don't feel safe, or when we're in situations that don't feel safe, we can't feel seen or heard. We have to be protecting ourselves. And so when I think of protecting ourselves, I think of masking.
Absolutely.
I'm going to pause there because I could go off, and I love your thoughts, Caitlin.
I know there, and I love these conversations because there are so many pieces that are not only interesting, but really important to this. And I really appreciate the importance of the DEI aspect as
Mm,
well, because it's one thing to not be seen either because of one part of who you are,
mm,
or the difficulty of getting into a space where you can showcase your abilities, like, as you said, whatever they may be. If there is an attack or a lack of acceptance for who you are simply as a person, as a whole, then, as you were talking about, not feeling safe, like this is the fundamental part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. we
mhm,
can't we can't we cannot expect ourselves to be able to transcend to those other levels of self-actualization, and I guess you could say higher ideation,
mhm,
if we do not feel safe. And of course,
mm,
this extends beyond just feeling safe, but actually being safe as well. And when there's so much rhetoric around perspectives of hatred and villainizing people or attributes, then the underlying message is that you are a problem.
mm,
And
mm,
if you are constantly being told that you are a problem, what other choice does a person have but to wear a mask in
mhm.
order to just survive?
Yes. we're not talking about burnout anymore, right, Caitlin? Like we're talking about just like getting out of bed and sometimes literal survival too. Like let's not
Right.
forget that literal
Right.
survival. And the more metaphorical, like forget about, you're exactly right. Forget about self-actualization and like, yeah, the higher needs, just getting to your job, period, can
Hmm.
feel like a huge task, especially if you get there and you recognize that you as a being are not okay there. Yeah, so that contributes to burnout, absolutely. Like, yeah, but survival too is threatened on a very basic, mental, emotional, physical level. And I think that's where when we think about the health problems, like the chronic health problems that come from burnout or chronic stress, I think it's that constant fight or flight that comes from just never really feeling safe in a situation. And so when we study DEI, oftentimes we're studying psychological safety and how to create that space. And I'm so grateful when I'm in spaces that feel psychologically safe, whether it's as a singer or as a therapist. I'm also very aware of how do I create those psychologically safe spaces. But I think today, because of our 10 minutes, thank you, it finally hit me how much I have been affected by being vulnerable in psychologically unsafe spaces and how it's done a little bit of a number on my confidence, I think, as a singer.
Yeah, and it's incredibly, I honestly, I feel like it's almost a process of alchemy, not only being able to understand and get a realistic sense of those spaces that are safe in order
Mm-hmm.
to be vulnerable, exercise your creativity, or sit with your authentic self, what, even just like in those 10 minutes in that way, to learn where those safe spaces are, spend time with them, prioritize them for ourselves so that we're not just constantly living in a mask. And it reminds me very much of a vocal coach in New York who has gained popularity on TikTok. She's known as the Yaya lady. I don't know if you've heard of her.
I love it.
Or excuse me, raise your ya
Oh, that's fun.
because a lot of the vocal coaching she does starts with, and